In Dune Part 2, Paul Atreides must join forces with a local Fremen tribe to get revenge on House Harkonnen for destroying his family. And he's doing a pretty swell job, mastering the ways of the desert, blowing up spice harvesters, riding massive sandworms, inspiring confidence in his men, and even getting Batista to run away to his mommy. However, when the villain side upgrades their game in form of Pale Elvis and even the Galactic Emperor along with his army, Paul is put to the true test. The only way he'll win is by living up to an ancient prophecy and uniting all Fremen tribes across the planet. And, also by launching a bunch of nukes at his enemies and bringing down the mountain on them and riding sandworms to finish off what's left of them. But then again, I guess it's not mandatory for me to explain all this, as Dune 2 seems to have already become the cinema event of the year. Everywhere you go, it's Dune, 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 whether it's Twitter or Reddit or your mom's house. I mean, my mom goes to the theater once every 2 years, and now for the first time she asked me to get her the best seat in IMAX because for this movie she wanted to try it. And that is understandable, since this movie is very effective at making an impact to become the talk of the town, kind of like a film version of Game of Thrones.
I'm busy, but we're talking about Paul.
One side of that obviously is the visual side, which would turn any unimpressed audience member into that John Cena meme. But it's not just the visuals. The way this movie is written is designed to hit you hard and give you reason to discuss. The characters make an impact because they play on incredibly high power levels. The sequences make an impact because their details create something you've never experienced. The plot makes an impact because it's born from bold choices that Hollywood doesn't dare make anymore. And since all that stuff is in our control as ordinary writers and filmmakers, unlike the visual side which is not, today, let's learn that control. Let's learn a couple useful ways to hit the audience hard enough to make them remember and talk about you. Or let's at least try, because as you may remember, the last time I discussed Dune, it didn't Dune so good. It's probably the most universally hated and worst Filmento video ever.
Oh, no.
Which some people would say is saying a lot. I'm not really bothered by criticism, as it would be hypocritical because all I do is criticize, but I do recognize that I'm in a fortunate position to have so many people watching, so I don't want to let anyone down. And last time, I did feel like I flopped so badly that I didn't want to even mention Dune on my channel ever again. Fortunately, I did have a chance to talk with someone about it, and it's no longer an issue. I'm over it. I'm better.
We're back, baby. Oh, shit.
I don't usually do that kind of talking stuff, but this was as easy as connecting with someone online, and here I am for another shot. And consequently, that's the only right sponsor for this video. It's BetterHelp, a mental health platform that has tried very hard over the years to become the most trusted and best way to connect with a licensed therapist online to listen to you and give you advice. It's super easy. Answer some questions to find the right person to talk with, set your own times, choose the way of communication. That's it. It's not for me to tell you what you should or shouldn't do in this area, and don't let anyone else do so either, but I will say that if you have something stored up inside, like from the lockout era or anything, this can help. So if yes, you can check out more at betterhelp.com/Filmento along with a Filmento Dune discount. Here we go. Firstly, the way this movie lifts its characters to high impact levels is by playing with power dynamics to essentially make them leapfrog off of each other. A good example is Batista, the House Harkonnen general from the last movie. In the beginning here, he has maintained his status as the big dog in the yard. As Paul and his gang of Fremen are making guerrilla attacks on spice production all around, Batista is obsessively trying to locate them so that he can snuff them out like the rodents they are. And he's becoming unhinged in the process. You deliver unwanted news, you're dead. You don't do your job well enough, you're dead. There's a lot of anxiety to be felt just by watching Batista because he's so far gone. There's a big worry over what happens to Paul and his movement when they're finally caught.
Then I will go further north.
The further north you go, the more likely it is you die.
And when Batista finally does catch Paul, what happens? Well, the power dynamic flips. The up-close view of Paul's movement makes Batista's rage turn into poop in his pants. He runs away like a little kid and barely escapes with his life. It's like the boogeyman has been unmanned. And while this can make it feel like Batista is wasted, which I'll get to later, the point is that Paul is elevated at Batista's expense. It's by looking at the terror on Batista's face that we realize the sheer might of Paul's movement. Like, oh, Paul is not a kid playing around anymore. He's a big deal. He plays on a level above the power level that reigned supreme in the last movie. By flipping this established dynamic, Paul and his movement have become much more. Another good example is Elvis Harkonnen, who gets called in to replace Batista. We may not know anything about him, but thanks to shifting power dynamics, we get a pretty good idea right away. See, what becomes evident is that Elvis has made a name for himself by fighting captured Atreides soldiers who have been drugged. But today, it's not that simple.
That slave isn't drugged.
We should cancel the fight.
Don't spoil my nephew's birthday.
Today, Elvis must become more than he was yesterday. He fights an Atreides fighter who isn't drugged. He removes his body shield. He will not accept help no matter how serious things get. And he does ultimately reign supreme pretty easily.
Show me who you are.
To be clear, the point isn't that Elvis beats the Atreides fighter because I don't even know who this fighter is. I don't know if he's supposed to be super skilled or not. The point is that power is relative. At first, Elvis in our eyes exists here, but thanks to the shift at the expense of other characters, we now see him far above that baseline. He's a guy who will step up when he needs to, a guy who doesn't fear, not even his uncle like Batista does.
I ought to drown you in that tub.
He is more now than we previously knew him to be.
This morning you were a playboy, but tonight you're a hero, feared and envied. My gift to you.
That's the key to lifting characters up to higher levels of impact. The fact that power is relative. It's by continuously leapfrogging your assets over and off of each other that you grow them into big deals, just like in Game of Thrones. The sandworms used to be monsters to fear, but now they're more so tools for the hero side to use, which highlights the power that the Fremen command in the sands. Elvis seems to fear and bow down to nobody, but then a hot witch walks over to manipulate him from here to Sunday, which highlights the might that these Bene Gesserit witches carry. The Fremen used to be seen as a native sand tribe probably hiding in a hole somewhere, but now we learn that there are armies of them on the other side of the planet, which opens them up to be a much mightier force than we initially thought. Characters and elements are best built at the expense of each other, and as long as you keep building up all characters even after they've been leaped over by another,
Where are you going?
To my room.
the overall level they play on will rise high enough to warrant discussion.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Secondly, the way this movie makes its sequences hit hard is by filling them with details far beyond their face value. If you look at the first spice harvest ambush, for example, it's a pretty basic sequence on paper. Paul and his team must hide in the sand and make the harvester go boom by shooting at it. But the thing is, that's not it, not in practice. There are added details in the sequence to make it way more. The harvester has air support, so we gotta get close to destroy that first because there's no cover out in the sand. The harvester has infantry, so it's a challenge to be up close. The harvester itself is dangerous, so even basic movement requires extra focus. And now, it's through those details where the real meat of the sequence is born. The noise of the harvester that wrecks the ground around us as we move through it to get into position. The threat of the infantry that makes it tough for us to get enough time to focus on the air support. The lethality of the air support that we can survive only by staying on the move and by stepping in a line of fire. It's a very basic premise of an action sequence, yet with the addition of these details, it turns into a very specific and special experience that you can feel in your bones. Another good example is the first worm riding sequence, which again is pretty simple on paper. Paul calls in a worm and jumps on it and rides it, and that's it. Except no, not here. Here, there are details in play that the movie gives time to play. First off, the worm itself is way more massive than expected, so to even get on it is like running down a mountain as the mountain is collapsing. After that, before you can even think about riding, the first thing that hits you is the sheer f***ing strength of the wind. The sand blows in at such intensity that it's nigh impossible to even get on your feet. And once that is finally somehow done, turns out that there's an actual method to riding a sandworm. You don't just stand there riding it, you toss in hooks to open air holes to push the worm to the surface to balance it out. All of which amounts to a sequence that is truly one of a kind. When I was looking at this in IMAX, I was doing so with my mouth wide open, because it was an experience unlike anything I'd ever experienced. That's why it makes an impact. And as Javier Bardem would say, it is as written. You gotta actually write this stuff. Coming up with cool sequence ideas is only half the battle. The real battle happens in the details. Figure out the special angles into your sequence and then let the angles play. Bigger details, smaller details, just something to make the sequence stand out. We've all seen sequences about shooting bad guys, so that's not the angle into this one. Here, the detail is about Paul and his mom trying to find cover as bad guy bodies crash around them inches away like meteors. The detail is about them being currently unarmed in the face of doom. That's what makes this sequence what it is. We've all seen sequences of two big armies clashing together, so this one is not only that, there's more within. Paul launches nukes to bring down a mountain on the opposite army and then rides sandworms to munch them up, all of which happens alongside the clashing together part. Even if you've seen 100 war movies, you've never seen this. So, after you have thought up your sequence, think about the special angle into it. Whether it's a fight scene under an eclipse, or a gladiator scene on an infrared planet, or an ambush scene in a veil of dust following a missile strike, or a war scene with so many fighters packed together that the biggest danger is suffocating into the mud. Just anything bigger or smaller to make the sequence stand out from its basic version. Your sequences are as written in the details, so write the details well. The third way this movie makes an impact is by making bold story and plot choices that most modern movies simply would not make. Some of this I already mentioned, like how Batista is tossed to his knees to make way for others. And while it can feel like a loss, it's a calculated one. Batista falls so that Elvis can rise. Batista is scared so that Paul can be intimidating. Batista gets what's his so that we can get justice for Paul's dad. The movie is making a tactical sacrifice for longer-term gain, like how the fact that the worms aren't scary monsters anymore elevates the Fremen into a force to be reckoned with, representing the power of the dunes. And in this manner, what's important for all filmmakers to understand is that the most impactful films are a zero-sum game. For a rocket to go high up, it must let something fall behind. Like the third act here, for example. I've heard some people take issue with this third act, that it's too one-sided and quick, that there's no real conflict in the battle, that a lot of potential is wasted. And I do understand that. All this time we've built up the Emperor as the ultimate power in the galaxy with the ultimate army, and now he comes in to basically get his ass banked with one flick of a wrist. Even his personal guard is so insignificant now that its defeat doesn't even need to happen on screen.
How the f*** did this happen?
It was a master mother.
Did this happen? Was this a
But at the same time, look at the other side of this plot choice, Paul's side. The story, most of all, is about Paul's rise to power, and the fact that the third act unfolds as it does makes that rise feel very steep. When we see Paul use his religious army to simply ram through the opposition, it becomes clear just how much power he has amassed, that at this point, the only one who can really bring Paul down is Paul himself. It's sacrifice and gain.
I rise, you fall.
And also, we do still get satisfying conflict as well when Paul takes on Elvis in a 1v1 battle for the crown. We get a real test of character for Paul, but without limiting the power he wields around him.
Why does he take such risks?
What deep leads the way?
To be clear, my point isn't that you should take crazy left turns with every plot choice, because that doesn't end well. That will get you in hot water pretty quickly.
How the f did this happen? How the f
My point is to understand that impact requires something to be hit, and that it's important to consider both sides, whether or not the gain is worth the sacrifice. Game of Thrones spent an entire season setting up the table and then basically wiped it clean in one montage.
Did I leave the stove on?
That has power, that gets audiences talking, and it was ultimately worth it. Yes, this movie can get a bit confusing with all the prophecy stuff and with Paul's mom talking with her unborn baby. A lot of audiences won't understand half of that. But on the other hand, it does all create this very strange atmosphere that you're just not gonna find anywhere else.
Sound okay?
And ultimately, the atmosphere does seem to outweigh the confusion. Not a lot of audiences were unable to enjoy this movie due to confusion, so I guess it was worth it. Yes, it's a pretty risky move to cut away from the hero to follow the villain side for 20 straight minutes. It's not a move you usually find in movies that cost over $10 million. The executives would rather kill you in your sleep than let you do that. But the flip side is that we get a full villain journey that runs in parallel with the hero's journey, which then packs their ultimate clash with power. It was 20 minutes well sacrificed. The risk was worth the gain. In a nutshell, in an industry that has effectively eradicated risk,
The mountains will protect us from most of it.
it's crucial to remember that the biggest games are a zero-sum game. Instead of using the first safe, obvious plot choice you come up with, start looking for choices that require consideration. And then consider both sides. Is the sacrifice worth the gain? Choose poorly and you'll lose like the end of Game of Thrones. But choose wisely and I'm sure you'll Dune more than fine.
It was her.